Hello everybody, it's me, Fee, White Zulu, and welcome to another chapter from my autobiography of the same name. I'm sorry about last week, but my poor, unfortunate and best friend, John Muslane, who is my producer, got bitten by a spider and so badly he was admitted to hospital and only discharged on Sunday night. And I've just seen the size of the wound. It was one of those toxic spiders, venomous spiders, which eat away at the flesh, or their venom does. And it's got a very large, big wound on his head, which is healing nicely. But he's all better now, and we're back on track. And this is chapter 35. Can you believe it? Second form at St. Anne's College. 29th of January 1962. And, along with a lot of yelling at the Zulu staff from Mum and at us alike about packing our trunks and getting ready, was my 12th birthday. For the next 6 years, I was to go back to school on my birthday, as the very first day of term always started on the 29th of January. For those 6 years, I had to celebrate my birthday a week early, a hollow mockery of a celebration. Every year when my parents wished me a happy birthday and gave me a present, the other 3 sisters spent the whole day saying, "But it isn't your birthday, so we don't have to be nice to you," and spoilt it for me anyway. The 4 of us would leave the farm in gig, the huge Pontiac, Delia to go to the prep, and me, Dine and Nicolette to go to the college. Mum would dump us unceremoniously in the drive at St. Anne's and take off again as fast as possible. He and Dad were going skiing in Val d'Isere in the French Alps, and then taking a Mediterranean cruise for 6 weeks, and were leaving the following day. If any of us felt unhappy about being left at a new boarding school, it was just too bad. Nobody was going to get any sympathy from her. Other parents tearfully embraced their daughters in front of the chapel. Our mother turned the car around with indecent haste and bolted. I was in McCrory House, a ramshackle old double-story wooden building with huge open-raftered dormitories partitioned into cubicles of 2, 4, and 5 for the lowest forms, with what looked like hospital curtains, which had to be pulled back in the daytime to reveal our beds and lockers in long rows. The head and vice head girls of house each got a wooden cubicle with a proper door. There was a disinfectant-smelling big communal bathroom upstairs, with the one and only lavatory, which was exclusively reserved for sixth formers. The rest of the house, of 50-odd girls, had to go down a precipitous staircase and use the 2 lavatories in the main passage of the old building near the gym. That and our common room was situated underneath our dorms. A long old trek in the night, I can tell you. I had a curtained cubicle for second formers, shared with 4 other new girls. 2 of them I recognized from the prep, both of whom ignored me as not worth the effort of a simple hello. But the other 2 girls were new. One of them, a girl called Mary, had the bed next to me, and when I saw her putting a couple of china horse ornaments on her locker, which we were allowed to do, and a photograph of herself with a dog, I knew I might have a good chance of making a friend. She came from Underberg, a small farming village in the Drakensberg Mountains, was the second to youngest of four like me, although she was lucky enough to have a brother, and was the Underberg GP's daughter. Best of all, I discovered that she also spoke pure Zulu as fluently as I did. Most white South Africans speak a little bit of kitchen or pidgin Zulu called Fanagalo, a bastardized African language which had been invented when the mostly Afrikaner gold, diamond and coal mine bosses had to communicate with several different tribes, all speaking their own languages. Among the masses of African men who poured onto the reef to work for them. It was only the whites who had grown up among them, like Mary and I had, who spoke the language properly. It wasn't taught in government or private schools, nor did it appear on any road signs. This is because Zulu is not traditionally a spoken language. Written language. And it was only the missionaries who came with the settlers way back in the late 1700s to Natal, who had started putting the words down on paper and translating the Bible into a written form of the Zulu language. All the different cliques made the African languages very difficult to write. People who had tried to learn Zulu from textbooks never got as far as we did, who'd picked it up by ear. Having said that, I can neither read nor write Zulu. Mary and I instantly became best friends. It was nice to have somebody who was as at sea as I was, and the difference now was that, because we were a whole form of new girls, we had mentors from the third form who showed us around and taught us the ropes. College had a far more grueling schedule than the prep. We had early morning prep every day. The rising bell rang at 6, and we had to jump up, get washed and dressed, and rush off to the classrooms by 6:30. As McCrory was one of the houses furthest away from the classrooms, we had to sprint to get there in time. After an hour of prep, we raced back to eat breakfast in the huge dining hall. There, I found a pleasant change, as nobody cared whether we ate or not. We sat at tables of 12 in our houses, each table with the prefect at either end who dished out the food. The only strictly enforced rule was that we had to talk. To eat in silence resulted in punishment from the prefects. So there we all sat, gabbling away frantically, trying not to talk with our mouths full, but terrified that if we stopped talking, we'd get some sort of detention. I couldn't find anything to talk about, as the subject was always boys, clothes or dances and tennis parties the other older girls had attended in the holidays, which boy they'd fancied, and so on. I ended up having to learn the whole of an exceptionally long poem called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Robert Southey in my first week there, for remaining silent for 2 minutes. To add insult to injury, the fifth formers were allowed to give out punishments. and it was extremely insulting for me to be dressed down by one of my sisters when what I really wanted to do was kick her hard in the shins. Since both my parents were atheists and had raised us thus, the other new to me, anyway, were the ordeals of church and chapel. For both, we had to wear white cotton squares called veils to cover our hair, like nuns did. My first church service on our first night at the college, something called evensong, was as confusing as everything else was turning out to be. We had to wear our white dresses, white bloomers, veils and brown shoes and stockings. Not tights, stockings. Since I'd just spent 6 weeks running barefoot around the farm, my feet had quickly reverted to their tough, leathery state, and I was to go over the same anguish as I had been through at the prep, with retraining my feet to wear shoes or sandals again, with the same results, a choice of either blisters or smelly shoes, sandals. We lined up in our houses in the main passage and traipsed off to the little Hilton Road church, which stood just outside the school. There we sat in pews and waited. Suddenly, everybody stood up, recited something, and dropped to their knees, shut their eyes and bowed their heads. A man in a white smock over a long, voluminous black dress came up the centre aisle with a solemn St. Anne's girl holding a big silver cross, walking slowly in front of him. He said something and everybody scrambled to their feet and sang a long hymn, reading the words from a green book. After that, there was a lot of chanting in Latin. This was a high church, apparently, and lots more singing and more praying. I stared around me in bewilderment. I had no idea what it was about. My parents, both openly and vociferously atheist, Dad's pet hates were the church, religion, and priests, as we have known from before, had never told us about God or Jesus, or even primed us that we'd have to attend church. St. Anne's, being a diocesan college and therefore high church, didn't just stop at holding evensong. We had an hour of compulsory communion early on Sunday mornings, an hour of chapel every evening instead of assembly, and another hour of chapel every night, except on Sundays when we had to go to church. That meant we had to attend church or chapel 3 times a day on Sundays and chapel twice a day, every day. I never learnt the Lord's Prayer, even though we recited it 6 times a day, as we had grace before every meal as well. I simply blanked the whole hour out each time and spent that time daydreaming and becoming more and more bored and resentful that I had to spend so much time devoted to something mysterious which I couldn't even remotely understand. What further astonished me was that the girls around me seemed to be taking the whole thing on board. They appeared to be praying earnestly or listening intently to the interminable sermons given by the lady warden, Dot, my old enemy from the prep, or Father somebody, the vicar. I just couldn't get it. What did they see that I didn't, and why couldn't I comprehend what it was all about? I stared at the sun blazing in through the stained glass windows and wished I was out on a hillside on my horse. This continued for the 6 years I spent there. Bunking church or chapel was one of the worst offences you could commit at St. Anne's. The prefects always knew who was missing and why, because we had to sit in the same place in the same pews each time. So if there was a space, the one leaving it had to be either sick and lying in the school sanatorium or hiding somewhere. Later on that term, I became highly allergic to house dust mites and suffered from constant hay fever in the dorm and every other building. Apart from streaming, itching red eyes and sneezing until my nose was red raw, I often had nosebleeds, which was a sure way of being escorted out of chapel and down to the sand, if it was a bad one and couldn't be stopped. I became quite good at pinching my nose and blowing out my sinuses so that I got an instant nosebleed and could spend the rest of chapel with a tissue clamped to my nose while sitting in the sun in the gutter outside. Even this, to me, was time better spent than the utter and sheer boredom of the meaningless services. The hay fever continued to plague me at home, but instead of having it investigated and perhaps some antihistamines prescribed, Mum just shouted at me in exasperation, "If you sneeze again, I'm going to kill you," as if I was doing it deliberately to annoy her. My first meal in the dining room, I had another shock. The food was served by Zulu men in white uniform, and when a black arm came past my ear holding a great big tin trough of some watery, pale macaroni cheese with chunks of tomato in it, I turned and smiled at the man exactly as I would have done with Mackay at home. I greeted and thanked him in Zulu, and he replied with a grin. The prefect on whose right I was sitting, and the second former to whom I was sitting next to on my left, both shrank away in horror. "You talked to those people?" they both gasped simultaneously. I nodded. "Yes, I always do. They're my friends." The two girls, as well as the rest of the table, who'd realized what was going on, goggled at me. "But we hate them. They're all savages," exclaimed the prefect, and the rest of the girls joined in to agree. "How could you?" someone shouted at me from down the table. "Are you a Kaffir butty?" I know what they were talking about, but didn't want to attract any more adverse attention, so I kept quiet while the girls turned and whispered things to each other. I wished I'd been at one of the other tables where my sisters were and might get some kind of support, but they were both at different tables. Afterwards, I went to see them individually in their sections of the dorm and asked what a Kaffir butty meant. "Shut up and bugger off. Whatever you do, don't come running to me if you get into trouble," was the response from both of them. So I realized that I'd get no help from that quarter. I decided to keep my affection for Zulus to myself. I'd come across my first taste of the casual racism, which I was going to be bombarded with from then on, from every quarter, the girls and staff alike. My parents were openly racist too, but I saw how they spoke to and treated the Zulus on the farm with some respect, and I hadn't made the connection that it was apparently all Africans who were terrible savages, not just the ones they read about in the newspapers. That's all for this time. I want to thank you so much for listening. And I also want to thank John, my producer. I've upgraded him from sound engineer because it's a far better title for what he does. I also want to thank Sean van Vuren for putting up my videos twice a week. He's my IT guy and he's an absolute star for doing it. And if you want to see more photographs and get more information on my book, this one and other works I've done, please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com. So it's goodbye from me until the next time. Bye-bye.